Okay, welcome everybody to the March 31st meeting of the Housing Production Advisory Council. Thank you all for being here and for all those attending and watching this virtual webinar. At this point, I will pass it over to Co-Chair Hall.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate it. And thank you everybody for spending your afternoon here with us at HPAC. Thank all the commissioners. Wanted to, not just thank you for today, but, we've been on a hard push meeting every Friday for multiple hours in March to get to this step here. And as you may recall, the executive order directs our group to adopt a framework and then proceed to roll up our sleeves and get into the details of what are the recommendations going to be. So our deadline for adopting the framework is tomorrow. So don't want to bury the lead, but we're hoping to get that done here today in this meeting. And then we can move on into the details, into the work groups that we've discussed, and we'll be discussing here again today as well. And really figuring out the process and substance for how this group is going to engage for the rest of the year. All right, so if we can pull up, Matthew, the framework, the component parts of the framework. I keep forgetting the name of that diagram, but our nice box diagram. All right. So this just really steps us through sort of where we've been, starting with meeting one and adoption of the initial kind of set of group objectives and understanding of the timeline, and then getting into the recommendations in meeting two. And that was really the effort to both compile all the work that had been done by various analyses in the state leading up to this, as far as housing need and the different elements of that, and then also getting everything on the table through use of a survey, as well as our discussions in this space, as for additional topics that this group would like to discuss. And so that's kind of what we got through in meetings one and two. Again, I just want to reassure everybody that while that has been compiled and provided to you in a draft framework, to the extent there are additional ideas, additional recommendations that kind of rise through our work group process or throughout the rest of the year, those are not, there's nothing that says we cannot incorporate those into our process. But we've made a valiant effort to get everything on the table, and that I think is reflected in the draft framework that you have. If you recall, in these green boxes, that was last meeting, figuring out for not actually doing the prioritization of the recommendations, but looking at factors that each of the work groups will utilize when actually doing prioritization of recommendations, and then identifying the work groups. And so that brings us to the gold box, March meeting number 4 here today. On the last day of March, which is, I note the date. I know everybody knows what the day is, but it's important because tomorrow is the first day of April, and that's the deadline for adoption of the framework. So that's where we find ourselves. Just wanted to step through that. Want to get any, open it up to any questions about process, where we've been, what our objectives are today, and recognize that each one of us, I believe, received a draft of the framework that kind of compiles all the work that we've done, and then our objective for today is to have a discussion about it and then adopt the framework. So I'd open it up to any members of the council, and also looking to my co-chair, JB, if you have any thing to add as well.
No, sounds good. And I'm probably going to be quiet most of the time. I'm coming live from Philadelphia for American Planning Association National Conference. So I keep freezing up on everybody. So I might just even turn my camera off here in a minute too.
All right, understood. So I'm not seeing any hands go up, so I'm going to take that as we don't have questions about where we've been in this process, and I'm going to kind of move us into what we're trying to achieve today here as far as adoption of the plan framework. I think this would be a good time for us to, well, my plan is to sort of step through the framework that we each have, and then open it up to folks to say, if there's items that folks would like to discuss, changes that folks would like to propose, but looking for, more specific than general items, because, trying to encapsulate the discussion about what is or what isn't in the framework within this one meeting. So, that I think, if everybody would take a look at, at the framework, it's going to be a lot of, it's going to sound somewhat repetitive to the process rundown that I gave you, because, the plan that we've been following is that we advance a step each week, and that step, when we advance it, gets incorporated into the framework. So the component parts are really what this group has done. And I'm seeing a hand, Mr. Riley Hill.
Yes, thanks for calling on me. I asked this earlier, and I think we all recognize that there's a bottleneck in workers in so housing production. And I'm wondering again why we don't have BOLI included in this, because they're part of the bottleneck. They're the ones that control the ratios for plumbers and electricians, and there's no dialogue with them. So I'm wondering why that is.
Okay, so
secondly, I'm wondering, I asked before, is there some reason that we don't share one another's email addresses or phone numbers with other members of the committee?
Damien, would it maybe be helpful if I touch on the BOLI, but also talk about next steps? Because I think that can address.
That'll be fine. That'll be fine. I just want to make sure we talk about it.
Matt, go right ahead.
All right. So thank you, Councilmember Hill. On the emails, everyone feel free to, if you'd like to share your email, you can share your email. I think the one caveat I want to put out there is this is a public body. And so talking to individual council members is fine. You cannot start a group email thread. That would violate public meetings law. So just to be really clear about that, as a public body, you can't meet electronically over email and be talking back and forth, but you can engage individually, because you won't be meeting with a quorum. So
but I don't know how we exchange our addresses. We've never been able to do that.
You can just email me, Riley, and I'll get that to you.
All right, thank you.
As far as kind of some framing on some next steps, so I think this will answer a couple of questions that have come in the last 24 hours. So, as Co-Chair Hall mentioned, what you've got before you is the plan framework. And so thank you for everybody who has spent time. The governor appreciates everyone who spent time in providing input into the content, as well as the kind of the various drafts. Essentially the framework outlines your process that you'll be going through between April and December of this year. It outlines the topics that have been suggested by various council members. I think this is maybe the first piece I want to touch on, which is, if the topics are listed in the document, that does not mean it's a recommendation of the HPAC. I think it's important to say that for the group, but also for the public that's watching. It is simply identifying the topics that all of you as council members have said you want to look into, that you think is either a barrier to housing production or could be a solution to housing production in the state. And then in the work groups will assess each of the topics or the prioritized topics to actually move those forward to proposed recommendations for the HPAC. So I think that's, one piece. I think the second piece there's been some questions, I think, similar to yours, Councilmember Hill, around engaging either state agencies or local government, state government, or industry experts. And I think what I would say is, with regard to the framework, is that this is the start of the process. So, we are hopeful, the governor and the governor's office is hopeful that in the work groups, you all will want to invite in more subject matter experts for each of the topics you're diving into. That's at your discretion as council members and as work groups to say, hey, if we're tackling these 3 things at the next work group meeting, we need to have, this list of folks come in, and this is what we need to have them prepared to talk about. So the work group process is the opportunity to dive deeper into each of the topics. It's the opportunity to have staff invite in whatever experts you're looking to talk with, whatever analysis you're looking to have. So it's really the start of the process. And then, as far as how things will come back to the full council, I'm working with the co-chairs. We're working on some guidance for the work groups. So folks have a kind of there's continuity across the work groups, and there's a clear understanding of how the topics that are being tackled at the work group level, what needs to be done to bring those back to the full HPAC, where the full council will make a decision about, okay, we've got these 2, 3, 4 recommendations coming out of a particular work group. Is this something that we want to adopt as a full council? So there's going to be a process for that, and there's going to be some more guidance around that as well. It's something that's one of the first things the co-chairs and I have to kind of finish up early next week. So just wanted to kind of lay all that out there. And then, so thank you for letting me kind of talk through that, and I'll pass it back to you, Co-Chair Hall.
All right, thank you, Matt. And let's see, we've got another hand up that looks like Alyssa. Go right ahead. Sorry, I have a small screen, so I'm like leaning in and trying to read stuff.
You all look small in this box. I just wanted to ask one follow-up question on what you were saying, Matt, which is, I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm getting letters that are being sent to all of us. Hey, this interest group wants to tell us about this, or this sort of subject matter group wants to tell us about that. Some are going to the co-chairs, some are going to subsets of us, I think. I'm just wondering, does that also get distributed through the subcommittees, back up through the main group? How do we get to see the letters that people are sending in? Because that sort of fits under subject matter experts to me.
Yeah, thank you, Councilmember Gertler. I think that's a great question. I would encourage everyone. I can facilitate being the keeper. I have a list myself of people contacting the governor's office saying, hey, I'm a subject matter expert on this. I think I should be part of the dialogue. So if folks want to send me the names of people who reach out to you or particular documents, I can kind of keep that and distribute that. Also feel free just to keep it yourself if you'd like, and decide who you want to recommend to your work group or the other work groups on who to invite in. So it's really at each member's discretion. I mean,
all right, thank you. And that has been a topic of discussion as far as sort of how do we catalog all the kind of touch points, because people are interested. The first thing is, if people are asking you how to engage, the answer in writing is we were able to establish the website, and I'm not going to attempt to say exactly, pardon me, the email address. I'm not going to attempt to say exactly what it is. But you can find it on the HPAC website for submitting written testimony. And then I think as far as, if we receive testimony as individuals, individual counselors, do what Matt said, send it to him, and we'll make sure that all gets incorporated in the process and made available to the council. All right, so the component parts of this framework really, we've got the executive order, and then, kind of the housekeeping things around who's on the who's on the council, who's involved, et cetera. I don't think any of that is particularly controversial or needs an in-depth discussion. We have the shared agreements and principles, which is the document you may recall that we spoke about as far as at the first meeting about how this council wants to engage each other primarily, civilly and with respect is really kind of what the central focus of that document is. And then we get into the topics of focus, and that's really kind of broken down into the two sections, recommendations that come out of the work of the state, and then new recommendations that have come out of this process to date. And then the next large portion of the framework is the work groups and work group topic assignments. I want to first thank everybody for filling out the surveys that you received as far as soliciting your interest in which work group that you'd like to participate. The good news, we were able to give pretty much everybody what they wanted as far as being in the group that you ranked number one, and if you wanted to be in two groups, being in the group that you ranked one or two. I think there might be one or two exceptions, but the vast majority of folks were able to kind of self-select as to what group that you want to be in, and we're able to populate the work groups accordingly. So thank you for taking the time to fill that out. Thank you also for the folks who indicated, who are, when asked for, indicated a willingness to be chairs or co-chairs of a work group. I believe also we have circulated, or Matthew circulated, the rosters of those work groups, and those are also towards the back of the framework. I think it's the last thing before the appendices. And so thank you to the folks who are going to be providing the extra effort to chair those. I think that Matthew mentioned the work
I'm
that
in
we
a
have coming.
virtual meeting right now.
Oh, Counselor Hill. Oh, thank you. You got it. And then, Matthew mentioned the work of, the next time that he and the co-chairs get together will be kind of starting the outreach about how we schedule and what cadence the work groups meet on, and how they start getting together and putting together their kind of customized work plans about how to engage with the recommendations and getting all of the information analysis necessary to work that process. And so that is all upcoming. So, I want to solicit from the group any comments, questions, follow up on the particulars of the framework. And if anybody has noticed anything in the framework that you would like to see changed, or anything that you feel like we've touched on in this process that hasn't been incorporated, or anything along those lines, I think now's the time to kind of mention those type of things and have a discussion about it. Otherwise, I don't want to be presumptuous, but we may be able to adopt this framework in less than 3.5 hours, or however long we had scheduled. Senator Anderson, go ahead.
Thank you, Damien. I'm just kind of curious, should the legislative members be feel slighted and excluded from any kind of assignments?
Yeah.
Or is it because we could float between anyone we want?
It's more the second. And Matthew, you can give the official version of this. We talked about it, and it was really, we wanted to recognize that we are in the middle of session. You do have a whole lot of demands on your time, et cetera. And, so as far as availability, we didn't want to assign people and have them not, representatives, and have them not be able to make it. But just to provide the flexibility to elected officials there to engage how you see fit. Matthew, were there other elements of that?
No, we're excited, Senator, that we know you want to participate in all the work groups. So the governor wants to make sure that, the representatives from the Senate and the House can participate in any work group that they want to participate in. So.
That's great. Thank you.
All right, JD, go ahead, man.
And quickly to tag onto that, I would also say that's also for the directors for the agencies as well, is that they will bounce from work group to work group. The only thing I wanted to add, Damien, is one of the things we will be working on with the chairs is obviously the scope of work for their team, but then also coordinating how we as the chairs all work together, because there's other elements about how all this stuff comes together, even crafting a document, thinking about regionality, thinking about scale, thinking about how those are actually come together into a final document. So we did try to, be judicious in everyone's time, but there is going to be additional work for chairs, probably an additional meeting a month or so to help coordinate that. And so we just want to make sure, well, thank everybody that volunteered for that or agreed to do that. And then we will be coordinating with you over the next week or so to get all that stuff set up.
Thank you, JD. Margaret and Vliet, please.
Thank you. Couple things, and I had a chance to chat earlier this week with Matt. So got some of this communicated to him. A couple of different things come to mind. One is, while the framework is really robust, my view is it lacks a message of urgency that I feel and think comes through loud and clear in the executive order. And so Matt graciously incorporated some language edits that I had offered kind of in the introductory pieces that kind of ramp up that sense of urgency, but it sort of falls down, if you will, in the rest of the document. And I just wanted to put a plug in for, can we agree that there's urgency to this? And so just as we're at this stage about to adopt it, I just wanted to put that on the table. My kind of other piece, which I wasn't smart enough to mention to Matt the other day, but as I looked at the assignments, and I'm on finance, which was in fact, my first and only choice. So thank you for that. It dawned on me, we don't actually have any lenders or investors. So Senator Anderson, if you want to start by joining the finance committee, we would welcome you. So there is definitely going to be technical expertise that is needed. And a couple of us probably have enough finance background to be dangerous, but that's just a note I wanted to put out there. So that's it for me.
Thank you, Margaret. And urgency has been something that's come up in each one of these meetings, and I think given the different cameras I've seen turn on and off, we may be circling back to that as a topic here before this meeting is over. So just want to put a pin in that as far as if we want to, as a group, either add to the framework, some statement of acknowledging the urgency around this topic and the emergency and the human-based crisis that's associated with being behind on housing production that we're trying to address. We can absolutely have that discussion.
Damien, if I can add on to that real quick, that was also part of the discussion we had last week. Was I think the hopeful intention is that we don't have to wait till December before we get any recommendations. That there might be things we identify through each of the work groups, roll up through the chairs, and then roll up through Matt and up to the governor's office. Things that we can do in the interim. Because if we wait till December, then that means we've lost a whole year for hitting our goal for the first year, which means that we have to then compound our numbers for next year. So I do hear you on that one, and want to make sure that we have a process for that, to make sure that we have a really good way of getting really good ideas that are really quick and easy, and things that we identify early on in the process up into the governor's office for action.
Appreciate it, JD. Ivory Matthews, please go ahead.
Thank you, Council Co-Chair Hall. I just want to piggyback a little bit off of Co-Chair JD's comments around the scope of work. I would love to, I just have two suggestions around the scope of work for the co-chairs. One is to make sure that we center all of our work around the factors for prioritizing our topics and making sure we always keep, the impact and potential, the equity and racial justice and the feasibility at the forefront of our work group conversations. And then also if we can add in a component where we report out those trade groups or subject matter experts that we've spoken to, that we include that to make sure that we have are transparent about acknowledging that we've heard their voices and we've incorporated those things that they have brought to our attention. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you as well. And I saw someone had their hand up for a bit and then they disappeared. And I don't know, that's just my
Co-Chair Hall, this is Joel Madsen. I did have my hand up, but Ivory hit on what I also wanted to lift up. So +1 on her comments. And I primarily really wanted to emphasize, like, in the plan framework, and I appreciate what Matthew has shared and both co-chairs have shared about the opportunity for engagement and involvement of industry experts in the work groups. That's not called out in our framework. That's not written in the framework draft that we have. And so, again, I appreciate it. I appreciate the vision. I think that just by not having it called out in the framework still can leave question on where that lands in the process. So I suggest we lean into that a bit and see if we can add that into the written plan framework as well.
right on. Thank you, Joel. Yeah, acknowledging that, that's something that, I've said in this space and we've had discussions about amongst the co-chairs and that, but, even to the extent we call it out, and I'm not against it, but just recognize there will still be questions about how all that happens because we haven't convened these work groups and got the chairs together. And so we're not, we're still going to have a number of process related questions that we're working out here in the hopefully short term as we prop up the work plan for the rest of the year. Mr. Bunn, Dan, if you would.
Are we thinking in our final deliverable, we're going to approximate how many units we think our actions will add to capacity? Because we set a pretty clear goal. We're looking for 36,000 units. We know where we are. We know where we want to go. Are we going to have some sort of, it's not an exact science, but are we going to try to put a little bit of mathematical rigor to the magnitude of our actions? Or is that just crazy town? And I don't know that we have to answer that today. That might be as we start going through our work. But as we're handing a big stack of recommendations to the governor's office, it would be helpful if you could identify, say, here's a great idea. It's going to add 20 units a year. Well, maybe they focus on some other stuff first.
That's a very good question. And, I'm going to answer it by describing the kind of conversations that we've had as co-chairs with Matt, the way that I think about it, right? That needs to be filtered through the work groups and all those different things. And I think it may be a little bit different for each recommendation and maybe a little bit different amongst work groups and all that stuff. But the goal in my mind is to have hard-nosed economic analysis that gives a kind of range on recommendations when that makes sense, as far as if this recommendation is implemented well, or this is what's possible as far as dwelling unit production and the impact of that, and trying to translate these recommendations back to you know, the priority factor of, you know, unit production and the targets of the group. The details of that, and you know, the questions I asked Matt are, hey, who's going to do this clear-eyed, hard-nosed economic analysis? And the answer to that is, you know, there is the, I think we heard from Josh from the state economic office, and then, you know, I'd ask Matt also, like, hey, you know, let's hopefully put some measures in place to have additional resources. I know they are a busy group there, and they are, you know, I also want to make sure that we have some kind of third party, maybe independent from the state and the influences of that type economics. So, you know, on the flip side, if we're saying, I want the analysis to tell us, like, hey, not a great idea if it's not a great idea. So, you know, that's not all in place. Contracts aren't let, that type of thing, but that's, I hope the direction that this is going and the level of resource that will be available to each of the work groups, because I think that's kind of a common need across the work groups, is how to, you know, meaningfully quantify, you know, if the recommendation goes well, and then, you know, and hold ourselves accountable to what our initial goals are and priorities.
I think that's great. That's a fantastic answer, and that's exciting. So I think we can all trace the theoretical impacts of what we think it's going to be, and if we can have someone that's, you know, smarter than me actually try to bracket some numbers, that'll be helpful for the end product. So awesome.
Yeah, and then you know,
I might caveat that, you know, so much of the stuff is interrelated with each other. So say perhaps we can get permits processed in 48 hours. Great, that's awesome, that's amazing. We can slam out a bunch of houses, but financing is complete wreck and we can't get infrastructure done. So it's, I think that might be something that maybe the chairs, when we meet separately, could kind of help coordinate that to try and see how they interrelate with each other and see where they kind of linkages with each other. Maybe take those numbers or make those estimates from the subject area work groups, and then we can try and like meld those together to see how they relate to each other. I think that might also be something that we might want to start working on to make sure that everyone's kind of products are similar. So, you know, an idea, potential solutions, potential development on that, you know, unintended consequences. I think that's actually something that's probably just as important as unintended consequences. I'll give you a really quick example on that. I was up in Seattle. They redid all this zoning to create all these multifamily houses, you know, 10, 20 units, these little brownstone units. But they still required each unit had to have 2 parking spaces. So when everything penciled out, they just created these 4-packs everywhere of townhomes. So instead of creating 10 or 12 or 25 units, they were creating 4 because it just didn't pencil out. So they were less than 10% of what their market, what their intended goal was. So all of Seattle's zoned for enormous amounts of housing, but then they just put in 4 and 6 packs everywhere of townhomes. So we want to also look at these unintended consequences to make sure that we're actually not just being pie in the sky, all things green, and we get to a number, but where are the pitfalls that we can start addressing that. So this is an ongoing process over time. So if we see these pitfalls starting to happen, then we know how to adjust for those.
Absolutely, thank you, JD. And that's kind of one of the topics that has come up, I think, throughout the discussions of this group, and we're going to have to figure out how to incorporate into the work group is kind of the you know, the easy way to say it, I guess, is coordination, but the interconnectivity between all these things. You know, if we make recommendations and they're getting implemented, what type of information and reporting do we need from industry, from local government, from different departments of the state, to actually know, you know, 5 to 8 years from now, however long, what has the impact been and why, like, you know, and you know, advance this meaningfully. You know, so we kind of need a different information set than what's currently available, and all of those type of things. And some of that lives in the updated housing needs analysis work that the LCD's been doing, but certainly not all of it. And so there's some discussion about how to best incorporate that into this project. And, you know, do we have, once we start getting recommendations and draft recommendations out of work group, do we prop up a late forming work group about coordination, and we start analyzing what those type of things mean? And so all that is just a, you know, a preview into, you know, discussions that we're having and trying to figure out how to, you know, optimize this process and get, you know, good practical recommendations that the governor can work with that are, you know, best that this group can provide based on its expertise. Mr. Olson, Eric, go ahead, sir.
I'm not muted this time, so I've learned. I guess kind of the big picture thing, and I think kind of Natalie went into this a little bit at the last meeting. It's important that I think we understand that when we try to solve a problem, we're not going to be able to achieve maximum any one of the values that we're trying to achieve. Like something might be very helpful for affordability, but it might not have a massive impact on production levels, or something might be something that we can enact very fast and get it into the process to help the system so that we can improve one thing, but it might not have a great impact on another piece of what we are overall trying to achieve. So I think, you know, for instance, there's always going to be competition out there for what the sort of the overarching dominant thing that we're trying to achieve when we're solving a problem. And some things have to be sacrificed along the way. If we try to maximize everything, I think we'll end up with little, if anything, getting done. And so I think from my standpoint that we need a little bit of feedback, you know, from the governor's office in terms of, you know, if we focus entirely on production, or if that's kind of the major item, there are going to be some other things that are going to be lost along the way, and we just have to accept that. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to sort of necessarily achieve whatever values the governor finds to be the most important, so that she can sort of take it through or take our recommendations with great seriousness.
Thank you, Eric. And you know, I agree with what you're saying, right? Like, there's nothing that's not going to balance between, you know, cause balance between some priorities. And you know, the way that this process has been framed, focused on production and with a pretty audacious goal of increasing production, it's very easy to sit back and say, well, we've got to do all these things. But you know, what I'm hopeful for out of the work of this group through the rest of the year is that we do get at those series of trade-offs. And you know, we don't necessarily need to answer what is the perfect set of trade-offs or the exact right balance. That kind of gets into a political question. But if we can provide recommendations with sufficient information identifying what those trade-offs are and figuring out how they interrelate, so that you know, that information is in front of the governor, I think that you know, we'll have done a good job here. Looking at Ivory, Matthews, go ahead.
Yes, I'd just like to add, I know that you know, we'll have to have some trade-offs, but you know, when I think about the factors and the three major factors that we're looking at, I would hope that that we all consider equity and racial justice as a non-negotiable factor to set aside in how we view this work. And so, you know, when we talk about equity and racial justice, and especially in the world of housing production, that's been a part of one of our factors that we have hundreds of years of recognizing that we've placed those things aside and not have fairly placed those as a top priority. So for me, I know that I will continue to voice that that's a non-negotiable from my perspective. And I would certainly say, you know, venture to say also from my colleagues who are other housing authorities across the state, that's a non-negotiable factor from them as well. So I just wanted to make those comments. Thank you, Chair Hall.
I appreciate that. And, I think that similar conversations around like what I mentioned about, having clear-eyed economic analysis. We need to make sure that we're talking in the work groups about how to have clear-eyed analysis of what are the equity impacts, because there's not, not a whole academic field that's been built up around for decades around how to quantify those. And it's, often, takes practitioners, takes a sharp eye of practitioners and an experienced set of folks who aren't typically involved in these kind of state processes to accurately identify those things. So I think it's even harder to quantify in a reliable way than economics, but again, equally as important. All right. So I'm not seeing any hands. I would invite anybody's thoughts, comments, edits, suggestions, however you want to describe them, on the framework. And if people don't raise their hands, I'm going to ask us to vote on the framework. So that's what comes next. There's not another step. Okay. Well, actually, I take that back. I put a pin in something earlier. Want to circle back around to a comment that Margaret made, and I think that built on a conversation she had with Matt, and also built on some comments I think that Ernesto has voiced at a number of these meetings about the urgency of this process. Well, maybe not this particular process, but the urgency of the problem that we're trying to address with this process and how it should be reflected in the process. Is there a specific way that folks think we might incorporate that into this framework, or do we want to adopt the framework and then vote in favor of them, that it be accompanied by a message of urgency and something along those lines? And we want to integrate those, separate those. What do people think? And I'm seeing JD and then Margaret.
My comments not to that. I had one other note, a star by another item, is to include explicitly the use of other industry into the conversation during the work group. So if like the directors and the legislative members, that they're kind of floating, going throughout the entire work groups. If that's not already there explicitly, I don't remember that though either. So I'm sorry I derailed the conversation.
Oh, no worries, no worries. I think that one might be actually easier to tackle. So let's just tackle it and get the urgency one. Matt, do you think that in the kind of planned framework process or the council objectives and timelines where we talk about, I'm looking for a good place where we're talking about work groups to include specific note that the work groups will be able to access both the resources of state agencies and expertise of state agencies, but also industry expertise as well.
Yeah, I think a preamble before the work group member and chair identification, I can just add something in there that makes it clear that the work groups, one, that the co-chairs, directors, and legislators will participate in any work group that they want. And also clear language that the work groups will have access to agency staff and to be able to invite in industry experts and state and local government officials in order to inform their analysis of the topics. I can just be real explicit in the preamble of the work groups and chairs.
All right, that sounds good. Just so that it's clear to everyone, I'm going to call that the work group preamble and instead of trying to restate that in the future. What Matt just said, work group preamble. All right, thanks folks. And then, so I think up next is Margaret.
Thank you. So to your question about how do we want to think about that, I remember talking about, but I don't remember seeing in the document, the idea that we would have some kind of decision-making criteria as we vet ideas. And so it strikes me that, you know, one such criteria could certainly be ease of implementation or speed, or, you know, likelihood that it could result in immediate change or unlock new development more quickly than some other longer term things. It just feels like we're gonna need some criteria by which we sort the dozens and dozens of ideas that we've all got to work with. And I would just like to put that in there.
So I agree with you that we're absolutely gonna need some criteria. I'm not sure if I followed at the end when you say you'd like to put that in there. A recognition of the work groups will be discussing and adopting the criteria. We've got the 3 prioritization factors, which, as we've discussed, are broad and kind of an overarching thing with a whole lot of sub factors, and we'll have to get into the details of how those are applied on a work group by work group basis.
So I think the viability or feasibility one could include, you know, how quickly could this lead to change on the ground, something like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you're saying that there's subcategories underneath those 3 biggies.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And and just kind of build on what I think JD said a little bit earlier, right? Like, again, these are discussions that have not been turned into actual documents. But the idea is to try and find a shared kind of format for reporting on recommendations, as far as these are this recommendation, and here are the factors to consider, and here's what, if it worked well, what would happen, so that there's kind of a bridge across the work and reporting of each of these work groups. And I would absolutely anticipate that the timeline on which implementation would result in additional dwelling units. Again, I think that's kind of the long form way of saying urgency. And I think that would definitely be a metric, right? Because we're gonna, just in broad strokes, have some things that, however you define short term, whether that's, in the housing industry, that might mean 5 years. But some things that will be effective in the short, middle, and longer terms, and we'll have to figure out, in our recommendation reporting, sort of how to say, if implementation goes well, this is the timeline in which you can expect this particular recommendation to have a meaningful impact.
Damien, can I wrap that up? Maybe that is a good task for the chairs when we all meet in the next week or so, to kind of go through. I mean, because I think there's all kinds of stuff like timelines, obviously the equity, the number of potential costs, ease of implementation. There's all kinds of things that we can start putting out as metrics or things to be tracking. Not all of them would require all of them, potentially, but I think I'm also thinking, like, how do we take all these, 180 things and then report on them at the end of the year? It needs to be something organized. And I think if we start with an organized reporting system at the beginning, it'll be easier to kind of roll that out at the end of the year. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around this. And I think there's going to be a lot of topics that could be included in that. And it might be something that a smaller group of the chairs can kind of work on, and then modify and update and massage over the course of the year. If everyone would be okay with that.
Thank you, JD. And yeah, and just process-wise, it's been, just the kind of co-chairs and Matt talking about, like, hey, how are we going to do all this? But now we're, after today, expand that to the new set of chairs for the work groups, And then we'll actually be in the work group setting, getting down into the details of the, so that everyone will have the opportunity to weigh in on, a whole lot of these items and figure out what are the subcategories, and then, kind of figure out how do we actually prioritize amongst these many things. For more hands, I think we've got Natalie and Jenny. Go ahead, Natalie.
I was just looking through under the factors for prioritizing topics, and it seems like the sense of urgency can be easily you can kind of read into what's there now under impact potential and feasibility about, things that could be done quickly or in the short term. So I don't know if maybe just adding some more language to those two areas would make that a little bit more apparent, but I think it's there's a skeleton there at which to look at the different topics.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd even add on to that. I'd say, I could make cogent arguments about producing dwelling units as fast as possible, advance all three of those prioritization topics. So I don't think it's in any way excluded, but that's a good suggestion as far as, making a note, Matthew, potentially as far as adding some language to that prioritization section. And the factors in prioritizing topics, I think that starts at the bottom of page 24.
Yep, sounds good. I can do that.
Okay.
There's a little bit in the preamble, but I can extend that into each of the prioritization factors as well.
All right. I appreciate it. So let's see. So I'm just taking notes here. Okay, so far we've got two, I think, updates, edits. One is to update the work group preamble in the way that we discussed before. I'm not going to try and say those 5 things again off the cuff. And the other is to incorporate discussion of urgency into the prioritization factors section. See some head nods. I'm not seeing any more hands. Folks, feel free to chime in as you see fit. Otherwise, I'm going to say that I would accept a motion to approve the framework with those 2 edits to the work group preamble and incorporating urgency into the prioritization factors. Anybody like to make that motion?
I'd like to make the motion that we approve with those modifications.
All right, thank you.
I second it.
All right, thank you, Mr. I believe that was Robert Justice on the
Yep, that
second.
was Robert Justice, yeah.
Yes, sir. All right, thank you. All right, so that has been moved and seconded. Before we get to the business of voting, I do want to, give everybody another opportunity to do discussion, deliberation on the pending motion. I think that's what Robert's rules compels me to do, but also, if anybody has final thoughts, additional things that we haven't touched on. All right, seeing none, I'm going to ask all the council members that would like to vote in favor of the pending motion to raise your virtual hand. And Matt, if you could do the tallying, that would be great.
Eric? Daniel? I agree. Karen? Senator Jama? Representative Dexter? Robert? Tom? Joel? Gowrie? Justin, Senator Anderson, Margaret, Natalie, JD, Deb, Damien, Melissa, Riley, Ernesto. Okay, Co-Chair Hall, that is a yes from everybody in attendance today.
All right.
Matthew, I think there is an application within Zoom that you can download on the apps that will allow you to do this. That way you don't have to be counting all the time.
No, that's great. Thank you. I'll get that activated for the work groups.
Right on. Thanks, Ernesto. Senator Jama, you got your hands up. I'm not sure if it was from voting or if you'd like to say anything. You are more than welcome to do so.
One more time, Farron, to take care of my hands, so I will lower down my hands. Thank you.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Thank you. Well, I'd like to take, a moment and thank everybody, maybe congratulate ourselves, pat ourselves on the back. There was a very clear deadline to do what we just did, and that was tomorrow. So as far as I'm concerned, we met the deadline of the executive order. And so, that's our first bit of business. I do want to, remind everybody that the message of urgency, I've heard it loud and clear repeatedly, so we're not taking our foot off the gas, but we are rolling up our sleeves and getting into the details, and more to come in less than a week on what these work groups are going to look like and what the timing is going to be. And we'll get into the nitty gritty of scheduling and getting everybody into groups and figuring out what our work plan is, for the next month and for the rest of the year. So I really do appreciate everybody's insight. I know that this has been a push through the month of March, and everybody's given up large parts of their Fridays to come and be involved in this and get us through the framework process. And now we get to really get into these recommendations and really kind of, figure out what is the best way to meet some of these goals that are set out for us in the executive order, and really up housing production in the state and be responsive to this urgent need. So I would open it up to the group. Is there anything for the good of the order before we wrap it up? I don't have any additional items for us to do. I'd also throw it over to JD and Matt if y'all have anything else to talk about, but I think we might be able to wrap a little early today.
I just have a congratulations to everybody for the work. It's an enormous amount of work, and we're about to double our work, I think, in the next month or so to get up and running. There's gonna be a lot of research. Again, make sure you especially the chairs are going through those task items. We'll be meeting, I think we'll discuss on trying to get all of us together probably in the next 10 days or less, I believe. I think we want to keep the momentum moving. And so start looking at those, seeing how they can all be kind of coordinated, start setting up your documents and everything. And yeah, looking forward to working with everybody in the next 6 months, or well, next 9 months, I guess. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, JD. Matt, anything for the group?
No, I'll just add my thanks and congratulations. I know it was a tight timeline and a little bit hectic. I also want to thank all the agency staff that are on that help support the effort behind the scenes to be able to get us to the framework in, 4 weeks, but really probably more like 3 weeks. So just add my thanks.
Fantastic. I appreciate it. All right. Members of the council, more to come. If anybody would want the last words, now's your time. But hearing none, meeting adjourned. Thank you all.
Be well.
Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Take care, folks.